Hello and welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today we are speaking to Nadia Jama. Hello Nadia.
Hi Paul.
Hi, how are you?
Good for a Sunday morning.
Excellent. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you think socialism is?
Wow, so socialism. So I think when I think of socialism, I think about people and community. You know, everyone being treated the same regardless of their ability, their age, race or gender. It's really about a way of living, people pulling together in the interests of each other, whether that's neighbours, work colleagues, friends, family. It's all really, for me, about everyone being treated with fairness and sort of equality at its core, and that is socialism. I also think it's really weird because we don't really think about socialism. You know, I wouldn't have classed myself, and my parents wouldn't have classed themselves as socialists. But actually, when you think about the things that we did as a family and things that we did as a community, looking back now, I realise that people were socialists. We just didn't know what that word was. We didn't really use that word. But when I think about socialism from a political perspective, and particularly more recently, I think about, a Green New Deal and that being, how we would tackle the climate crisis, putting people before private profit. And, people will often say to me, well, what has socialism ever really achieved? What countries ever implemented socialism that's worked? And then when you actually explain that, the NHS is probably the best example we've got of socialism, people don't really connect it in that way, but it's probably one of the best examples we have in this country. This is about a service that is available to all, free at the point of use, and that is the best example. Education, socialism within education would be, everyone having access to education, lifelong learning, again, free at the point of use, which we used to have, growing up. You didn't have to pay to go to universities, and people have benefited from that. And we know that, if people benefit from those services, that, particularly in education, that, our society's stronger, our economy's stronger. If we've got socialism in a workforce that, is well paid, is respected and protected with a good work-life balance, everybody benefits from that. So, there's so many different examples of socialism that we just don't really think about. Even like with the social security service, having that safety net, that's a form of socialism. Everyone having access to, decent, secure homes, that is socialism. And wanting that, for me, it's like, why wouldn't you want that? I've benefited from those things growing up. My family members have benefited from those things, and you want your children and grandchildren to. Why wouldn't you want everybody to have the same opportunities in life? But I think, the media's kind of demonised socialism, particularly in the last, 4 to 5 years. It's been termed, Corbynism, and obviously we've seen the kind of media go against Corbyn, which has really just been pitting people against their own best interests. So I think for me, if you want to see socialism written down in black and white, it was in both of our last two manifestos. Literally, socialism drips off every page of the 2017 and the 2019 manifestos. I mean, I joined the Labour Party in 2016, and I'll be honest, when I first started going to branch meetings, I wasn't quite sure it was for me. It didn't feel like it resonated with what my kind of upbringing was. There was nobody like me, really. There weren't people that had lived on council estates. I'd grown up with access to free school meals, and I just didn't feel it really reflected me as a person. And then when the 2017 manifesto dropped, that for me was just like night. It was as night and day. absolutely why I wanted to continue to be involved in the party, because everything in that manifesto was what we need. You know, if you want a fair and equal society, it was there written down. So that's kind of why I continued, you know, to stay in the party, and I've actually stood in local elections, because I want everybody to have equal opportunities and a decent standard of living, and access to good, you know, good homes. Like I said, why wouldn't you? If, you know, if you're a socialist, that's what it's about. You know, growing up in a working class family, it was a natural state of being. Like I said, you know, we probably didn't call ourselves socialists because we wouldn't have seen ourselves as that. You know, there was examples within my community. You know, the Working Men's Club was a great example of socialism. You know, they would often, well, every year actually, they would pay for the kids on the estate to have day trips out to the seaside. You know, you get a little brown envelope with £1 in there, the old green pound notes, to spend, and that was them giving back into the community. And I just think, you know, that is something that I want other people to be able to experience, that collectivism, that solidarity. That is all about socialism for me. You know, when my dad, obviously my dad was a steel worker, and, you know, there was 80s was quite a turbulent time in Sheffield particularly. You know, there was redundancies, and we were on free school meals, and we even had periods of having access to school uniforms. You know, they used to call it the Eddie Grant. You know, everyone had the same outfits, and everyone knew that, you know, the families that were receiving those services. But that was, you know, our families, you know, our parents had paid into, you know, their taxes had paid into that, and we were reaping the benefits when we needed that safety net. So for me, socialism has always been throughout my family and my upbringing. So I'm a socialist without even realising. Like I said, it was just a natural state of being. And I think whilst I didn't recognise it as socialism, and I recognised it as just what decent, honest people did for each other, what I do really remember being quite alien was kind of, you know, Thatcherism. You know, that was alien to me. You know, that was identifiable as going against the community and going against the collectivism. You know, it was very much, you know, her view of society was about individualism, you know, and that crept into our communities and workplaces, you know, from the 80s onwards. And then we started to see a breakdown of those industries. And, you know, that was devastating. You know, I'm from Sheffield, the city of steel. You know, it was built on a proud industrial heritage. You know, I lived 2 miles from Orgreave. And Thatcher was determined to smash our class. She was determined to smash the miners. And I think, you know, growing up, for socialism, I guess, 84 was a significant turning point, because that was the green light that Thatcher needed to implement her rancid, you know, neoliberalism on us that still affects us to this day. You know, all of those fruits of our labour, all of those means of our production that she sold off and privatised, impacts us, you know, still today. You know, from 84 on into the 90s, every asset was sold, and, you know, under the guise of it would give us you know, better opportunities. You know, we'd have better choice, we'd have you know, pricing would be more, you know, more cost effective, and none of that was true. You know, we were literally, you know, our political socialism was being sold. So I think it's easy to identify what isn't socialism, but not actually recognising what socialism was. But it was there throughout my life, throughout my family, throughout my communities. You know, we were all working class, lived on you know, a council estate. And, you know, everybody lived together, schooled together, worked together, and that was our life. That was socialism. It was that collective solidarity that we had throughout all families, all age groups, all different races. And, you know, we need to claim that back. I think we need to make sure that, you know, I was interestingly, I was having an online debate with an old school friend recently, and his view of socialism was it ends in poverty. So there's this really skewed view that the media have perpetrated and the Tories have perpetrated about what socialism is. And I think we need to claim that back, because it is just about people having a fair and equal society to live in. And surely that isn't a bad thing.
I find what you say there really, really interesting, because a lot of the things you talk about, the decline of heavy industry and the lack of manufacturing jobs, some of the things that I find people who are currently supporting right-wing ideologies really care about. So they really think that the country is being let down by the decline of heavy industry and, you know, and a lack of manufacturing. And yet socialism is somehow blamed for that. You mentioned neoliberalism. I don't want to get too much into technical details here, but
Yeah.
what is your understanding of neoliberalism? Because I think people almost use it, sometimes I think people use it as an insult online and say you're a neoliberal, and no one seems to know what that necessarily is, or certainly not an ordinary thing to know. So what's your understanding of neoliberalism?
Yeah, so I think for me it's about that private profit, isn't it? It's about the capitalist state. It's about, you know, private companies. You know, if you think about the, you know, British Telecom is a classic example of you know, a neoliberal capitalist way mindset, in that, you know, it was sold off, and actually, you know, we do have lots of telephony providers now, but they all go back to that infrastructure that was owned by British Telecom. So we've kind of got all, you know, all of these services, but things are not cheaper necessarily. In fact, things are really more expensive. And that, for me, is what Thatcherism was. It was about not us as members of the community benefiting from those assets that were sold, but the shareholders and the private companies, you know, creaming the profits, and not actually putting that back in. So like rail is another example of that. You know, train prices now, I mean, I work in Sheffield, but I travel around, and, you know, going up to Glasgow, it can be nearly £200 for a rail ticket. Well, you know, that was privatised, and that was supposed to, you know, benefit us so that we would have more choice and better pricing. But actually, we're not benefiting from that £190 ticket. That isn't coming back into the system. That's not upgrading the network. That's not benefiting commuters. That is going to the shareholders. So for me, that's kind of what I mean when I talk about that. It's an ideology that doesn't benefit people. It benefits corporations. It benefits, you know, big business, and not people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good description for the outcomes of neoliberalism. And I think neoliberalism, to me, is it's just back to that idea of trickle down economics, and people who believe in that ideology, which involves the current Conservative Party and Donald Trump. It actually, their ideology is that if you look after the people at the top, the wealth will trickle down. So their priorities at the top. They're unapologetic about that, and I find that absolutely bizarre that people don't really know that that is what they're voting for. They're voting for, you know, we're going to look after the people here, and everything else will sort itself out. The market will regulate everything. And the fact that you mentioned trains, which are also government subsidised, funnily enough. So we actually pay for that from the state, and they make profit out of it. That's well, thanks for that description, because I think sometimes people get a little confused about what these things are. I'm going to move on to something that I'm really interested in that you've been doing. Can you tell me a little bit about what Acorn is?
Yeah, so I joined Acorn, and obviously we refer to it as the trade union for the community, really. So we it's been ongoing for a number of years now, and it's around, I think there's about 18 cities in total. But it's, it started off really around renters' rights, and it was very much geared towards supporting tenants, because that's what the members that joined were really having issues around. But we do lots of other things. So we're very much led by what the members need support with and assistance with. So we've had more recently a lot of stuff around buses. So, for example, in Sheffield, Sheffield was renowned for its bus service. I, up to the age of 16, I was able to pay 2p to travel, and I think adults it used to be 8p. And we've started to see that people can't get to work because the local bus companies, because they're all about private profit, they don't really put on services to benefit people. They just want to put on the routes that people are more likely to use, and that's left a lot of communities and people isolated. We go out and talk to people and get their feedback, and I was talking to a young family who travelled from not far from the city centre out towards the local shopping centre that we've got, Meadow Hall, and it cost her £15. Her and I think she's got 3 children. £15 to go from your home to the local shopping centre. That is just outrageous. That is not sustainable. So we fight for things. And she was one of many people. We fight for people within the community that have got issues, and we do campaigns around that. So we do lots of demonstrations. We go and protect renters. So if there are evictions, so if a landlord is threatening to evict any tenants, we'll go and support those tenants. And we had an incident recently where, believe it or not, during COVID, this pandemic that's global, people are being threatened with evictions. So, we went along and, asked for the landlord to speak with the tenants because he'd been refusing to engage with them. So we will support our members on anything that that's affecting their kind of day-to-day living, because, that's, like I said, we're a union for the community, so we're led by them.
So that sounds an awful lot like me about how you were describing socialism. It sounds like a community-based organisation is exactly what you think socialism is, and that's what you're putting forward there. How is that structure organised? Are the people who lead on ACORN? Or?
Yeah. So we have some key roles. So we have branch secretaries, we have community organisers, but a lot of it is members, and that volunteer as well to support each other. So during the COVID crisis, we've been doing mutual aid stuff. So not just for our own members, but for other people within the community. So we're going out doing prescription deliveries, shopping deliveries for people that were vulnerable or isolated. So there's lots of different things that we get involved in. So it can be members supporting members, or members supporting other people within our community.
So I guess the inequality in your area must have led to your involvement a little bit in ACORN. Is that what's inspired you, the idea that we're living in an unequal society?
Yeah, Sheffield, like I said earlier, it's got a real proud industrial heritage. It was a steel, it's called the City of Steel. And when those industries were gone, that led to the breakdown of a lot of our communities. We've got we're now classed as the low pay capital of the country. We've got something like 40,000 children within our city live in poverty. The inequality that we have in Sheffield is staggering. you know, within a 4-mile radius in some suburbs of Sheffield, you can have a 10-year life expectancy difference. So, you know, that's kind of part of the reason why I'm in, you know, the Labour Party. We've got 18 food banks in Sheffield. You know, we've had more added since the COVID crisis. You know, last year, as a city, we provided school meals for 3,000 children during the summer holidays. So that, you know, the inequality is just staggering. We have, on average, you know, 500 Sheffielders die from air pollution. So, you know, and Sheffield's always had a proud history of fighting class and race inequalities. So, you know, that's why I'm an activist, you know, to try and work, you know, within ACORN. I'm also involved in the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, and the Labour Party, because there is, you know, after 10 years of Tory austerity and having our budget slashed so much, I think, you know, you have to be involved. We have to try and make a difference, because, you know, the inequality is just, it's staggering. It is literally staggering. And, you know, I often think, you know, I grew up on one of the big council estates in Sheffield during, you know, Thatcher's government. And, you know, I and my family, you know, we had access, like I said, to free school meals. And I just wonder, you know, what would our family be like under these times? So, you know, we have to kind of support each other. That is what socialism is about, isn't it? It's helping each other, that collectiveness, that solidarity. It's really important.
I think it's really interesting to hear like your stories from Sheffield, and we've heard from a lot of people from the northeast of England, and it's coal mining here that, you know, a lot of people's experiences of, you know, that have led them to be socialists have seen like the inequality generated through the miners' strike and the solidarity shown amongst the community at that time. And it's really nice to hear that, you know, it's not in isolation. These feelings of community aren't you know, there's something very unique about the experiences of each community, but the communities are linked by that feeling of trying to help each other. And I like that idea. But you did mention the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. Can you tell me what, for people who don't know anything at all about Orgreave and what happened there, could you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the you know, we know that Thatcher had set out really to try and close the pits throughout all of the country, not just here in Sheffield. I mean, Orgreave actually sits on the border with Rotherham and Sheffield. And, you know, there was the miners' strike, but Orgreave, particularly, you know, the premise of that campaign is around what happened on the 18th of June 1984, when there was literally a police riot. You know, there was, you know, up to that point, people were not allowed. You know, there was a lot of restrictions around miners and picketing. And on that particular day, people were just allowed to make their way up to the Orgreave site. You know, it was a beautiful sunny day. There's pictures of miners, you know, without the tops because it was such a glorious day. And they were just led into what, you know, turned out to be a police riot. You know, there was thousands of police on horseback that charged into those miners, and 95 of those miners were arrested on, you know, riot and unlawful assembly, which back then carried a life sentence. And, you know, we have been trying, and those miners have been trying to get some justice for that, because, you know, there was a plan. You know, Thatcher had a plan, and it was the Ridley Plan, and that was about how she was, you know, going to turn against the British workforce. And, you know, those miners, you know, some of them are still impacted to this day. You know, the physical and emotional scars are still with us today. And it's like, for me, it's those historical injustices are really important. And, you know, I lived 2 miles from Orgreave, and whilst my dad wasn't a minor, and, you know, I was still at school when it happened, the consequences of that day for me are really significant and still important, because, you know, after that time, Thatcher had that green light, and the anti-trade union laws that were implemented, you know, throughout the 80s, led to the, you know, what we see today. You know, Orgreave in itself, it's now, there's a housing estate, but there's lots of places where you've got, you know, contact centres and retail parks with little or no union organisation at all. And I think that was that significant point in our history, that we've got to fight for. You know, those injustices have carried on. You know, we've seen the Windrush scandal, we've seen the Grenfell scandal, and this year we had an online rally, and all of those campaigns came together in the United and Strong sort of, that was the theme of this year's rally. And it is about having a public inquiry. We want an inquiry to what happened that day, because lots of other things, you know, resulted in smashing our class, basically. And, you know, people have said, well, why bother? You know, it was 36 years ago. Why are people still interested in knowing? Well, I think you'd have to ask yourself, why, if there's nothing to hide, are the you know, papers that won't be released until 2066? You know, what is it that's within that period of time that is still being hidden from us? So, you know, we had hoped that, you know, had we got a Labour government in December, you know, Corbyn had committed, as had Diane Abbott, to putting in a public inquiry, and we'll, you know, just have to hope that the new leadership stay firm on that commitment, so that we can actually get justice for those 95 miners.
There are some parallels here, aren't there, with Hillsborough, with the length of time that people have campaigned for this. That you know, an inquiry was resisted there. So, is that the kind of, is that something that people recognise within the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the Shrewsbury as well. You know, that was even longer. I think that's 46 years, and they've had some movement. And you know, there's lots of other historical injustices. We are one of those. And there's some that, you know, Grenfell is 3 years on, and still is nowhere near to having, you know, the outcome of what happened there being sorted. So, yeah, I think we have to continue to fight, because those things will continue to happen. You know, Amber Rudd said back in, I think it was 2016, that there were no lessons to learn. There was no more, you know, that needed to be learned. And actually, when we saw the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, in Whitehall, we saw the exact same policing methods that were used in Orgreave in '84 being used in 2020. So, you know, nothing has been learned by the Tory government, and that's why we fight for an inquiry, and we'll continue to fight for an inquiry.
Has what happened that day, and in the subsequent incidents that you mentioned, has that damaged the relationship between people in your community and the police? Because, you know, I think it's very important that you have a community feel to your policing, where police are part of a community, and you know, are active in their local communities and don't take things out on people. You know, so what are your feelings there?
Yeah, I mean, policing within Sheffield, I mean, it's like everywhere else, isn't it? It's been cut back under Tory austerity. So, you know, the community policing isn't what it was. You know, the it isn't the same. So I don't think that's a result of you know, Orgreave or any hostility there. I think, you know, that is just the breakdown of you know, austerity affecting all public sector working. You know, we've seen a reduction in lots of places of work because of that. You know, in public sector, you know, they've tried to cut our fire services. You know, obviously our NHS is you know, badly underfunded, and you know, there's a lack of resource there. Schools within Sheffield, you know, it's across the whole of that sector. It's not just in any particular reason just around the police.
So, you know, it's quite depressing to think of you know, the struggles that the people of the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign are still feeling now. So I want to kind of move on to a more hopeful vision. Now we are going to have 4 more years of a neoliberal government. We know that. So what is it that we can do to, in the meantime, to try and make sure that we at least have our community supported by socialist principles?
So I think we've got to fight for what was in our last 2 manifestos. You know, they were strong policies that resonated with working class communities. You know, we had 12 million votes in 2017, we had 10 million votes for those policies in 2019. You know, the media is always going to be a stumbling block, and it'll be interesting to see how the new leadership fares on that front. But it's about political education in the workplace. You know, we've got to support the trade unions. You know, since COVID, we've seen an increase in trade union membership, actually. So, you know, I think the pandemic hopefully has lifted that veil of oppression that we all face. But working in our communities is going to be key to that. You know, engaging with the younger generation. We've seen how, you know, the activism from the younger generation around the climate crisis. You know, we had a fantastic green industrial revolution that was that, you know, Rebecca Long Bailey nurtured. You know, that has got to be our way forward, because that goes through the heart of every stream of life. You know, every industry, every part of our community. And I think we've got to ensure that as Labour members, that, you know, Starmer and Miliband make sure that that is a priority within the next manifesto. We've also, I think, you know, got to ensure that we can't leave the working class communities behind again. You know, the Northern Discomfort paper that Ian Lavery and John Trickett wrote, we've got to seriously consider that as well, because that's going to be really important. You know, we know that we lost some of the working class vote, but some of them, you know, won't, you know, they borrowed their vote to the Tories on this occasion, and we know why a lot of that was and what that was about. But I think, you know, fundamentally the manifestos and those policies that we had are what make lives better for everybody, and we've just got to really ensure that we don't go back to you know, just a little bit of austerity is all right. We've got to really push that. We've got to be active in our communities. Groups like Acorn, you know, across the country, you know, get involved in the historical injustices. You know, there's Grenfell, there's the Shrewsbury. You know, there's all of these things that we can be active in, and I think showing people in the community the support that we can give them, and the successes that we can gain, is how we bring people with us as well. You know, I was I joined the party in 2016, and I hadn't seen, you know, it took me joining the Labour Party to see my local councillors. We've got to be out there in the communities. We've got to be part of those communities throughout now for, you know, the next 4 years until that next general election, and winning for them and listening to them, you know, really listening to what those people need in those communities and how our policies can benefit them, and politically educating. It's really important that we change this narrative around socialism so that people realise that it's in their collective interest to fight for a socialist government as well, because we all benefit from a socialist government. So, you know, I think it's, you know, it's not called a struggle for nothing. We often hear that. But there's a lot to fight for, and we've got a good grounding on the last two manifestos, and we as Labour members have got to fight to keep those policies and build on those policies, because that is what will make a society fair and equal for all.
It's really nice to hear you're so positive about people's nature. Do you believe that people are generally, in general, on average, do you believe that people are generally good? Or do you believe that people's nature is generally bad? Because
no, I think people genuinely just, you know, most people just want to, you know, work, you know, have a holiday, have family time. You know, people, and you know, most people are not naturally individualists. You know, people are about community, and we've seen that. We've seen that with all of the mutual aid groups. We've seen how people have come together, you know, at a time of crisis. But you know, we call it the British spirit, but it's there at the core of our humanity. You know, it's there. People are genuinely, you know, good and just want to have a decent standard of living.
do you think that's something that is a defining quality in socialism? Do socialists generally tend to believe like in the goodness of people, and do they believe that people in generally are trying to do the right thing and are trying to make the right decisions?
I do, yeah. I mean, I think otherwise, why would we, you know, fight for? I don't, you know, we're not fighting against people, are we? We're fighting against an ideology of a government, you know, that's a far right government that, you know, that wants to put businesses before people, and you know, but the wider community just want a decent living standard, and I think, as a socialist, it's just about making sure that our message about how you achieve that consistently is, you know, through a socialist government, and not these, you know, we often hear, and you know, it was something that the mantra that, you know, I you know, was pushed to my generation. If you work hard enough, you know, you'll get the right rewards, and you know, if you haven't got them, it's because you've done something wrong. But that, you know, that is not the case. I think, you know, COVID is an opportunity for us to build on all of those mutual aid groups and all of those communities that have pulled together, and not let the narrative, you know, the Tory narrative, take that forward. We've got to take that forward as socialists.
Do you think that's a message that we've got across very well? Because like surely people who we have faith in would want to vote for something that we believe in, or do you think it was like maybe Brexit and the fact that we know we appeared to be going against what people had voted for in our 2019 manifesto?
Yeah,
Does that
I mean,
damage the trust?
yeah, I think we have got to build back some trust, absolutely, as a party. You know, I think the difference in the 17 manifesto around, you know, respecting the referendum result, and then in 2019, you know, not being as clear on that, I think definitely damaged, you know, some of our core vote. But I think, you know, what we've seen since then, you know, how bad the Tories have dealt with the pandemic. And, you know, it's almost like, you know, we've got a Trump version here, haven't we, in Parliament, you know, who's just not interested, you know, doesn't always turn up. I think those people will be feeling let down that they borrowed their vote to that Tory government. I mean, you know, we've now left the European Union. That is not something that we really need to be focusing on now. It's about what we look like after, you know, we've exited the European Union that we're fighting for. And I think that's when people will naturally start to come back to the policies that we put forward. But the media played a massive part in undermining our message, and we've just got to have some key messages moving forward to win that trust back. And we've got to be consistent. And I think to completely throw our last two manifestos out would be a massive mistake, because people did believe in them, and we in December we got 10 million people that believed in them, and we can build back those other millions of votes that we lost from 2017 and potentially more. But yeah, we've just got to be consistent with our message and be in opposition that people can believe in.
You've certainly restored my faith a little bit. It's been absolutely lovely speaking to you about this, and it's so nice to hear all your opinions on what you feel socialism is and how ordinary it is to be a socialist. Basically, just people who care about other people, who believe that other people are good. I think that's quite a nice definition of socialism there. So thank you so much for talking to me today, and thanks for talking to Socialist Think Tank. It's really appreciated.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Give my love to Laura.
I will do. That's how all the videos are ending now. Give my love to Laura.